Hello, everyone. Hello to my panelists, Jack and Chris. Okay, so I know this is the last panel of the day, but I do think this is one of the most important topics of our time. So let's get started with some news. So just yesterday, Bloomberg Industry Group laid off 14 employees. Recurrent Ventures cut staff at Popular Science, The Drive, Domino, among other brands. We've seen layoffs at Vice, the total end of Jezebel, among others. Jack, you've largely spent your career in traditional media and journalism, while Chris, you have not. Rather, you have done making news on TikTok. I'd love for you to just start by responding to the information I just shared.
Sure. So to go first, my name's Jack. I'm the editorial director, multi-platform at Vice News, which is kind of a complicated way of saying I oversee our social first content and look after our social media platforms. Primarily, my interest was in TikTok, where we've got 3.6 million followers, and also Instagram, where we've got 2.8 million followers. And I think initially we can't talk in earnest about the future of journalism without talking about the problems it faces. As you mentioned, Jezebel, we lost it last week. In the UK this year, we lost Galden. BuzzFeed News, Reach PLC in the UK cut 450 jobs last week. Many of them were journalist jobs. And I hope the fact that I'm here talking about the future of news goes some way to explain Vice's news, Vice's vision and future within it. But it's a difficult time and we need to adapt, basically. And the future's quite likely within tech. It's quite likely within these emerging platforms. And journalists just have to show up on the platforms people are using. We have to embrace it. We have to work together.
Yeah,
what do you think, Chris?
Yeah, my name's Chris. I'm a TikTok newsreader and influencer. And I started TikTok 3 years ago reading the news on COVID and went viral overnight. And from there, really, it's been a very fast-paced journey. And I've had no journalism training, and it's just kind of working alongside kind of my own mindset and verifying the information the best that I can possibly, and bring it to a younger audience as well that are connecting differently to how people do perceive their news and get their news as well.
And what do you think about the state of the industry that, you call yourself a news reader, look at what's happening with the news? Talk about that.
I think that the way that people perceive their news and they're getting their news is a lot different now. I think that news is definitely reinventing, and I think that a lot of people are falling behind, especially some traditional journalists as well. I don't think that people are turning to your traditional journalists to get your news. They are going to people like myself to consume that news as well. However, I think that there's a line between journalists and influencers, and I think that we need to kind of work together and come together as one, because I think that you've got people like myself that work very hard to verify the news and get the right news out there to my audience, but you've also got influencers that do the wrong kind of news and get the wrong kind of news out there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are lots of creators on TikTok. Some do it very well, like yourself, but I think that the origin of news means news has to be new.
Yeah.
So kind of, if more creators like yourself could kind of look at like news lines, talk to sources, go to comment, that kind of thing.
So, Chris, you bring up a great point, which is you verify the news, but not everyone does. How does someone who is going on TikTok to look at something like, I don't know, Israel-Palestine, see this TikTok creator verifies their sources versus someone else who's just going off of vitriol? How can audiences discern?
100%. I think with my following and gaining over 250,000 followers in such a short space of time by reading the news, the way that I present the news and people consume the news from me is to get it in a very easy to understandable way. So I always stay within the mainstream narrative and don't mediate off the mainstream. Because I feel that if I go off the mainstream and go off my own tangent, for example, for clickbait, then people are not going to be trustworthy of myself. And I think that there's a lot of trust issues with journalists at the moment and newsreaders. And I think that the way that people get their news, people aren't just looking for that person behind the desk from BBC News. They're looking for someone that can give them that community connection as well, with a little bit of maybe live entertainment thrown on course there as well.
Yeah, okay, so we could go all day talking about your process of verifying and how you decide that something is worth covering versus not covering. But I want to get to you, Jack, because you're doing the multi-platform strategy at Vice, which operates on a traditional newsroom model. You have journalists around the world, different bureaus, etc. But you are kind of making that news for TikTok and social platforms. Do you consider Chris, someone with just as many followers as Vice, to be a competitor, or like how do you look at that landscape?
Honestly, no, I don't. I think journalism as an industry is quite gatekeepery, and to survive, we need to not do that as much. I think the sweet spot really is when journalists can work with creators to make the kind of content that matters, that works for different audiences, emerging audiences.
Let me pause you right there. So how does a creator and a journalist work together? Like I myself am a journalist. I do mostly written news. Like how can I work with someone like Chris? Tell me.
Your company could hire him. You could do a partnership. I mean, like, speaking specifically with Vice, we've in the past hired some journalists who also have TikTok followings who kind of emerge on the line between journalism and creator content. Sophia Smith-Gaylor is an example, who's big on TikTok, worked for Vice News, and it just brings an extra dimension to our coverage. And I think you're right in saying that often having a face to content is really successful. It's a way of breaking down barriers between you and your audience, and it just creates an effective strategy, I think.
Just to step in from that as well, I think that when you said that journalists and influencers should be coexisting and working alongside each other, I believe that, well, my biggest inspiration, funny enough, is Madonna. And Madonna reinvented the pop industry. She reinvented how you perceive it. But it's true, yeah. She reinvented how the female pop star was born today. You wouldn't have Beyonce and you wouldn't have all the other big, huge superstars if it wasn't for Madonna. And I feel that news is starting to reinvent itself, and people are going to people like myself to get their news. They're not turning to traditional journalists, they're turning from newsreaders as well. And I think that journalists and broadcasters should embrace that as well. I think that it shouldn't be seen as a fearful thing, it should be seen as a way forward, because the majority of younger people do get their news from TikTok. So you should be embracing it so it can be trustworthy news, and they are getting that trustworthy source as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a reinvention, sure, but it's quite a painful one. But I want to talk about something that you just mentioned, which is young people getting their news from TikTok. Chris, 3 days ago, you posted how you hadn't been on a plane in 17 years until 3 days ago, which is amazing. Welcome. I hope it was okay. And I saw a comment from a viewer saying, "So since the time I've been alive." This really gets at the core of like young people consuming your content to get the news. Talk about that responsibility and what it's like to be the newsmaker for young people.
Yeah, so I feel that with what I do, I like to do it in a very simple and easy to understandable way, but I also like to go live streaming with my audience and my community and have a bit of a discussion and debate with them as well if they're a little bit frightened about, for example, the war in Ukraine. When the war in Ukraine broke, a lot of younger people were scared that World War III was going to break out, and I had to reassure them that that's not the case, because there are procedures in place to make sure that that won't happen moving forward as well. And I think that when people come to me, they look for me for that kind of, comfort as well as reporting the news as well, but they're also looking for that bit of community. They're looking for me having a laugh and a joke with them about not being on a plane for 17 years, or I live streamed with my audience yesterday and told them that I got room service for the first time in my life, and I've never had room service before, And I think it's important that I feel that news needs to be more community-based, and it does need to relate to a younger audience, and I think that you need to be able to connect with that younger audience as well, because I feel that some broadcasters and some journalists are really falling behind and not embracing that change.
Yeah, and Jack, I'm 30 now, and when I was young, the place to go for cool, off-the-cuff news was Vice, and I think it still remains that, but, the Vice model is different. It costs a lot of money. Talk about catering to the young audience and also funding journalism at Vice. How does that work?
Yeah, so we want to be relevant. Our mantra is we always show up on the platforms that people are using. TikTok's used with Gen Z at the moment. We show up there. When we started TikTok, it kind of wasn't our initial aim to monetize it. It was really an audience play, and that really helps our overall reach with different advertisers.
Okay, let's pivot. So we have, again, we're at a very, very contentious news moment. We have two wars, Israel, Palestine, Hamas, Ukraine, Russia. These are getting a lot of play on social media. There's been a lot of negative talk about how they are getting played on social media, how they're getting played in the news. What do you guys think? How do you cover these topics responsibly? It's really complicated, so tell me everything.
Well, I personally had to take a week off TikTok when Israel and Hamas's war started, because a lot of people were asking me to have an opinion. Now, I advocate to be as unbiased as I possibly can and be impartial, so I decided to tell my community at the time that because I do take some of the news that I do report to heart, that I needed to take that time away from that as well. When I've come back, I've told people that I try to remain as unbiased when I'm reporting on that side as well. Nobody wants to see anybody on any side sadly losing their lives and being, dying. And I think it's important that content creators like myself have a very reliability to make sure that they are being as relatable as they possibly can, but also verified, because I feel that on social media there are so many influencers that read the news, but they're very biased and they have their opinion as well, and some will jump on the bandwagon for the sake of jumping on a bandwagon, and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stay true to myself and be who I am. So I try to, it's not that I shy away from the news on that, because I do report the news that's going on there, but I try to stay as impartial and down the middle as possibly as I can when I'm doing that myself.
Yeah, I think as news outlets we have a responsibility to cover it, to show what's going on and make that coverage work on different platforms. We talked about TikTok a lot, and I'll stick with it, but one of the difficulties we have is our reporting really focuses on the human toll of the conflict, the humanitarian aspects everywhere, and TikTok's community guidelines are very, very strict, as we all know.
Yeah.
We have to very carefully select what we can show on that platform while doing justice to the story as well. And I think misinformation has been rife with every conflict, but particularly with this one. We see it everywhere on every platform, and part of our reporting, part of the videos we put on TikTok and Instagram has been talking about this misinformation, and even last week we did a video on AI images that were being sold on Adobe, generated by users that were kind of showing fake scenes that didn't happen in both Gaza and Israel.
See, just to step in there, from when I reported on what was going on with Israel and Gaza, I told my audience when I went live, and I told my community that I wasn't going to put any video footage on there because I had trouble verifying it myself.
Yeah, right.
So I said to them that I wanted to make sure that when they were getting the news from me, that they didn't have the imagery that come with it as well. And I think also as well that does adhere to some people don't want to see that, but still be reported on what's going on out there as well.
So, okay, thank you guys for talking about that. Jack, I don't mean to call you out, but, Vice did just lay off a number of people. You're still there. I would love for you to talk about why you think, no offense, why you still have a job, besides the fact that you're great. Why are you still there, and what's it like for you now?
Yeah, so the media landscape is changing dramatically. Legacy media outlets, I don't know if I'd necessarily call us that, but we probably veer onto that these days, are struggling. I think the reason that I'm able to move ahead with my team is our audience and the audiences we can reach. Last month we got 66 million views on TikTok.
66 million.
Yeah.
It's a big number.
32 million on Instagram. And I suppose it's an asset to be able to reach the number of people, and just kind of keep pushing forward with that, kind of trying to future-proof not only ourselves but media in general.
Okay, so now, Web Summit is a tech conference, so in 2023, naturally, we have to talk about AI. We're talking about the disruption of traditional media or social media, responsible coverage, but the truth is that this whole thing could just be decimated by people typing into ChatGPT, hey ChatGPT, what's the latest with Israel-Palestine? How are you handling the threats that AI impose in our industry?
Well, I've personally been embracing it, to be honest with you, because I'm learning as I go from the last 3 years being on TikTok. I've started to slowly incorporate AI into the work that I do. Now, I don't type into ChatGPT what's the latest going on in Israel and Palestine, because I look that up and research and do that in my own words as well. However, it does help me verify it with the new feature with web browsing with AI with ChatGPT, so that I can make sure that when I am verifying the news to make sure it is correct, I can say, hey ChatGPT, I found this news, or some influencer talking about that, I want to do the report on that myself, but can you verify this for me? And what ChatGPT will do with its pro version is it will actually break down for you all of the sources and cite it for you, so then I can do my research and look into that in a little bit more detail. So I've kind of embraced it and kind of incorporated, and that's the whole thing about reinventing yourself when you're in journalism or you're doing news reading, is just constantly staying ahead of the curve and constantly changing and evolving, because it changes on a week in, week out basis, especially when you're a content creator as well.
Yeah, I don't necessarily see it as a threat to us. I think it's something to be used, reported on, and treated with the same kind of skepticism that we as journalists use every tool. I think it's definitely seeping its way into our industry. I think the most obvious example is kind of news aggregation. Some, like Apple News, will pride themselves on their kind of human-led approach, whereas I think some like Artifact, which was founded by the guys who started Instagram, openly uses AI to do it. And I think in the content space, we're seeing it as well, like BuzzFeed doing AI-generated quizzes, eventually moving into kind of articles, mostly travel content. Like, I don't know what ChatGPT would say about where to get the best like Natas in Lisbon or anything like that, but it's interesting, and it's something we kind of need to be skeptical of, but report on, and as I said, embrace. That's just the future.
Okay, so we're almost out of time here, and I think the perfect question for us to end on is about money, and making money, or at least attempting to. How does one make a profit, maybe even get rich in journalism in 2023 without inducing a number of conflicts of interest, being a responsible journalist, and handling all the things that we've been talking about this entire time?
So I have many revenue streams on TikTok myself with my following. Actually, when I started TikTok, I didn't do it for money reasons. I did it because of passion and that I was quite enthusiastic. And then companies would email me going, hey, we like your news. Would you like to do an advert for us? So I think it's navigating through partnership and brand deals and marketing and choosing the right brands that work for me. And obviously with the news that I do as well, not to kind of cross over from that. And I also have, obviously, the TikTok Creator Fund community platform as well that helps me.
RIP, though. No more TikTok Creator Fund.
TikTok Creator Fund, that's the one.
TikTok Creator, now it's the Creativity Fund.
It's this Creativity Beta program now,
Yeah.
so they're actually paying their creators more for the content they do produce as well. But I know that I've got a duty of care to still stay within the parameters of the news that I'm producing and not trying to go for clickbait kind of news as well, to try and, because when you earn more from the Creativity Fund, it's easy for you to say, oh, I could do this news story and it could go viral, but then you still to make sure that you're staying within your morals as well.
And yeah, I guess what I can say is like Vice's income stream is diverse. Monetizing TikToks is definitely possible. Will likely make up a big part of my 2024 strategy, but as long as kind of editorial independence is retained, which it always will with us, that's the way to make it happen there.
Well, thank you guys. This has been absolutely fascinating. I learned a lot and have a lot to think about. Thank you guys for attending.